There is something fantastically rewarding about creating your own wildflower patch, and this short video is going to explain how you can do it. It's simpler than you might think, and as I say, incredibly rewarding for not just the biodiversity in your garden, but also in terms of its colour and interest throughout the summer months. There are two seeding windows for sowing wildflower mixes. The first is in the spring, so that's from March through to really the end of May, and the second, September, October time. You can sow later in the autumn if you're on lighter soils, but with a heavy clay soil like we have, I wouldn't want to put seed on the ground past October. In actual fact, that late summer window is preferable if you have a choice, because there are some species which need to get cold to germinate, and there's one in particular, yellow rattle, which is very useful for regulating grass growth, which does need to a prolonged period of cold before it will germinate in the following spring. If you do have an issue with vigorous grasses and you've got yellow rattle in a mix that's sown in the spring, then it's a good idea to actually add some the following summer. So the first thing to ask yourself is about the site which you want to sow. As I said, this could be any size, but the important thing is that it's in full sun. Typically speaking, these wildflower species do best in full sun. You're talking about a different plant community for woodland edge or light shade. You also need to ask yourself what kind of soil type you have to make sure that you buy an appropriate wildflower seed mix. Although you can buy generic mixes, the wildflowers will do better if they're particularly appropriate for your soil. It's important at this stage to say that the soil should not be improved. Please don't add compost or fertilizer or anything like that. It's not that wildflowers don't like those kind of higher fertility levels, but they'll be outcompeted if your soil is very fertile by grasses and by weeds like dock and nettle. So when you're thinking about what kind of seed you need, the first question you need to answer is whether you want grasses in your mix or not. Typically, a lot of the mixes that we sell on British Wildflower Seeds include meadow grasses. Many of them are harvested directly from meadows, but you can also find seeds, particularly for a garden environment, which are wildflowers only. We have a mix that we call our bee mix, which is specifically designed for exactly this kind of situation. If you go for a seed mix that just includes wildflowers, that will only need to be sown at 1 to 2 grams a square metre, which is a tiny amount. If you're sowing a lawn, you're talking about 50 to 100 grams of grass seed. So don't oversow, and don't be surprised when you're looking at it thinking, whoa, this isn't going to go a long way. If you have a mix with grasses, that's 4 grams a square metre, so a slightly higher seeding rate, but again, it's still going to be very low. When you're selecting your wildflower seed, whether it's just wildflowers or wildflowers and grasses, do buy it from a good quality supplier. Of course, it would be lovely if it was us, but there are other suppliers out there. But do be sure that it's good quality seed, and ideally that the provenance is UK. We're trying to encourage harvesters and farmers to produce seed mixes which they can take off their meadows and then clean up, and then we can sell to you. If you find on the website one that's close to you, that's fantastic, but otherwise the key thing is really finding a mix that suits your soil type. So the first thing we have to do is to create a nice clean seed bed. What you don't want are weeds and grasses coming through to compete with your seedlings. This is an area that we've covered in plastic for the last several months, and consequently that should have killed off those grass and weeds, so it should be nice and clean. The first thing we do is remove the plastic, obviously, and once we've done that, you want to create a gentle tilth on the soil. So just rake it over. Shouldn't take a moment. If there's any sort of detritus, bits and pieces here, you see some wood chips, then get rid of those, and then you're ready to sow. Actually, seeding can be quite tricky because the seeding rate is so very low. Although this is a relatively small area, the principle that we're talking about here is applicable for larger scale projects as well. What you need to do is to bolt the seed out with some kind of inert carrier. I generally use sand. It can be any kind of sand, horticultural, or in this instance we're actually using play sand from the kids' sand pit. Doesn't matter how much you use, but what you want to do is mix the seed in well with it. and make sure that you've got enough so that you can actually see where you've sown, which is one of the advantages of bulking the seed out like this. So once your seed is well mixed into the sand, you're good to go. Essentially you want to do 2 passes at least of your area, one back to front and the other side to side. If you don't get fantastic coverage, don't worry, the plants will fill that in over time, and if your seed mix includes annuals, they will get away very quickly, so they'll fill the spaces in. So after you've sown your seed, it's really important that you don't cover it. Don't add compost, don't add soil, leave the seed sitting on the surface of the soil. It's because some wildflower seed is tiny teeny, as you can see. It's going to be difficult to get going if it's buried, it just won't germinate. So once you've sown, all you need to do is give it either a light roll or, as this is a relatively small area, I'm just going to tread this in. By rolling or treading the seed in a little bit, you're making sure that it's in good contact with the soil. So what happens after you finish that? Well, you've got to wait and see the seed germinate. If the seed mix that you've sown includes some annuals, they'll get away very quickly, but the majority of species are likely to be perennials, and that's certainly true of our direct harvest meadow mixes, and they will germinate much more slowly. People expect them to sort of romp away like lawn seed, and they're going to be much slower than that. But be patient, and it's, I think, very true that the longer your wildflower areas takes to get established, the more diverse it will be. There'll be some species in there which actually won't germinate for a good few months, maybe into the next season. While they're developing, important just to keep an eye out for weeds. They're the usual baddies. There will be, despite our best efforts, there are going to be annual weeds that come through, so you can just weed those out. On an area this sort of size, that's no problem to do manually. At the end of the first summer, then you want to take a hay cut, and then move into an annual management regime. You'll find instructions on the back of the seed packets, and there's a lot of information on the website as well to help you going forward. But it really is a pretty simple process, if I'm being absolutely honest. These are native plants after all, so they can be left to look after themselves a lot of the time.